Everybody live, or at least in one take. It is the Michigan Realtors Government Affairs Videocast. I'm Brad Ward.
And I am Brian Westron.
And we are here again from the lovely Eastern Upper Peninsula Board, who, congratulations to them, won a special RPAC award for being over goal this year. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you for applauding. Applaud yourselves, that's fine. That's also to show you that we are actually live.
Yes.
For those who grew up in the Detroit region, like Kelly and company, we're here in the morning. So, Brian, we have the legislature is very busy at work. Of course, it's an election season, so summer is time for door knocking. We have the filing deadline that just passed, and a lot of our local associations are very busy with candidate interviews, so thank you for everyone who's serving on those interview panels. But they're not tackling some small issues here. I mean, we have the state budget, which the budget numbers just came out, that we have a little bit of a deficit that we have to work with this year, something that we haven't had over the last few years, but they seem to be working their way through that process. They're trying to tackle some Detroit school funding and reform, because the school district got an influx of cash from the legislature recently, but is also looking at running out of that cash quite soon. So those two big issues, but the big issue that we've been working on that is kind of in the mix with all of this stuff is dark stores, and how fitting that we are in the Upper Peninsula, because the dark store theory started right here in the UP with a large commercial retailer challenging their property tax assessment. And of course, the dark stores theory, for those of you who are unaware of what it is, and I can't believe that there'd be many in the room, but the dark store theory would be that when it went to the tax tribunal, this retailer used comparables for stores that were out of the area, were vacated, had things like deed restrictions on them, and this has kind of snowballed into a lot of other folks coming in challenging property taxes based on some comparables that may or may not be agreeable to the local government, but are certainly showing an effect, and as our appraiser members have looked at them, could be very questionable comparables in terms of what you use for appraisals, looking at highest and best use and using some of those generally accepted appraisal principles. But one of our own Realtor members of the legislature, Representative Dave Maturin, introduced a bill a few weeks back, and probably the most reasoned and measured approach that we've seen as an association towards trying to figure out what's going on with the tax tribunal.
That's right, Brad. This is House Bill 5578, and one of the key areas that we wanted to focus on when this bill came our way is to obviously Representative Maturin knows it will forget more than either of us know about appraisal principles in a lifetime. But one thing that we noticed very early on with the legislation, as we started to review it and look at it in the Public Policy Committee, was that there were a lot of terms that we felt could be reined in and streamlined and cleaned up to assure that, as we planted our flag very early on, that the tax tribunal process features generally accepted appraisal principles, and that it is not simply a directive to the tax tribunal on what exactly they would exclude, what exactly they would accept. It would in fact provide the tax tribunal with a set analysis on how to look at these properties that comprise the dark store theory of valuation. One area that we noticed right away as well was, quite frankly, that the parties, when they do come to the tax tribunal, we wanted to make sure that any changes to the tax tribunal process made sure that there was a benefit to both parties. Ultimately, if the tax tribunal is going to make a very controversial decision based on a commercial dispute assessment, an assessment dispute on a commercial property, we want to make sure that they show their work. So that was one of the key areas that we work with Representative Maturin on, making sure that if they do exclude a property that the parties are at odds on, that they have to show the basis for that exclusion and not just a blanket exclusion. So as Brad mentioned, some of these properties that have deed restrictions, well, the vast majority of commercial properties do have deed restrictions. It's part of the plan of development. So we want to make sure that they are not dismissed out of hand, but rather the tax tribunal has the latitude to analyze those properties and look at the deed restriction and make sure, if it's being used as a comparable, that the deed restriction does not substantially impair that value. So Representative Maturin, if you ever get into a conversation with him, you'll hear him talk a lot about highest and best use. That is really the goal of his legislation. He wants to insert the notion of highest and best use related to appraisal principles into the tax tribunal process. While we believe that the tax tribunal should already be employing these things, the legislation goes a long way in actually inserting it in statute that these are the generally accepted appraisal principles and terminology that ultimately the tax tribunal would be bound to follow.
Yep, and there's still a lot of moving pieces and parts on this bill. There's still a lot of high-level discussions. The bill passed out of the House Tax Policy Committee and is currently on the floor of the House. We're not sure at this moment in time whether or not the bill is going to be brought up here before the summer. There's a lot of discussion that's going on. We continue to have some discussion with both the representative on maybe a possible substitute or some changes to the bill, which seem to be worked into a fairly nice draft, the last that we saw, and having some more additional conversations with our friends in the business community to kind of explain, the approach that our folks took to looking at this legislation, the tax tribunal process, and the appraisal principles. So more to come on that. They probably have about 2 weeks left here. Of course, next week is the Memorial Week, and they will be hard at work again in the legislature. So look forward to more news from us and from Lansing. And with that, I will say farewell from the Sioux. I'm Brad Ward.
And I'm Brian Westron.
Thank you for watching.